What should be the ALT materials? The didactic materials specify the content of the subject. They also define or suggest the intensity of coverage of elements of didactic programming, as the time in the attention given to a specific aspect of the language. Finally, the didactic material define the learning objectives of the day-to-day. The materials that are designed assuming that learning is initiated and controlled by the teacher must meet different requirements to those who are designed for the learning to emerge from the student or the work or of a group. Some methods require the use of existing materials, other materials which are they will mention later, and also real-world material. Others, on the other hand, consider using materials that even teachers who do not speak English can use for your teaching. Some materials require highly qualified teachers qualified with an almost native competence in the language to be learned. Others in charge are designed to replace the teacher. Some guide different interaction in class while others inhibit these interactions. The role of the didactic materials within the education system will reflect the decisions that have to do with the main objective of the materials, the shape of the materials, the relationship of material of their types of resources, and the skills of the teacher. It should be noted that a design particular for an education system must involve a set of roles for the didactic materials in support of the didactic and teacher programming and students. For example, the role of these materials within a methodology functional communicative would be specified in the following terms. 1. The materials will facilitate the communication skills of interpretation, expression, and negotiation. 2. The materials will focus on intelligible and relevant communication instead of in grammatical form. 3. The materials will pursue the interests of the student. 4. The materials will include different types of tests and different means that the participants can use to develop their competence through a large variety of activities and tasks. It should be mentioned here the materials must have a certain degree of authenticity to be completely valid. As indicated above, they must also promote the independent learning of the student, making be aware of the learning process. For this, it would be convenient to add lists of an evaluation that would be delivered at the beginning of each didactic unit. In them, the students will find their different items that they will learn during the unit, and at the end of each class, they can fill it with the where had learning reflecting on that about their own learning autonomously. The second question. Propose for principles-based approach for the development of ELT materials. The development and evaluation of language teaching materials is a process and an interdisciplinary field of study. Our work has focused on the second language acquisitions investigations to formulate principles of teaching and learning based on theoretical aspects where there is some consensus. With, without, however, the process of language learning is still relatively unknown, and there are many uncertainties in ASL investigation. For another side, each concrete learning situation is a work of the student differ in the age, learning styles, and needs. For these reasons, the, there can never be an ideal book that meets all expectations. The development and evaluation of materials should be a dynamic process where teachers constantly examine their textbook operation and adapt the materials according to the content of learning. Despite the variety of approach and teaching learning situations in which students and teachers meet, there are a number of principal generals that could help us in our task of evaluation textbooks. The teaching materials must be related to the objectives. It is great importance that the materials used guide the students to achieve their objectives. They must be determined in a first place, and they all must also correspond to the general objectives of the didactic programming. We must take into account these stage objectives in the general objectives of the subject to develop our own objectives. Didactic. The materials must be related to them. The purpose of the didactic programming should determine the course materials that should be used and not the other way around. The teacher must be aware of the main purpose of the language and select the right materials that will help students to use the language of effective way. As mentioned in the section on needs analysis, our teaching must be based on what students need to learn. It say what you will need to do with English when you complete your course. This implies that the teacher looks beyond the class in the real world, focusing your attention in the use of the student will make of what he has learned in a situation that is not learning. Keep in mind the needs of the students. Continuing with the concept of needs, we must remember that for learning needs, not we understand the language that must be learned, but rather the way in which select its gradation, presentation, and practice. To learn in a way effective and efficient, students should meet with small doses of new information at one time. Information that we can call unit of learning. These units must relate to each other so that the students can relate the new language to what he already knows, and that build your knowledge of English, adding new learning units to what you know in advance. This vision is related to a focused constructivism in which the student's prior knowledge is fundamental and it exists at an adequate level so that it is capable of learning new things. The learning language is difficult and expensive, and students need to be stimulated and encouraged as they progress. This is basically the job of the teacher, although course materials can help if they are chosen in a way that is stimulating and motivating, in which the students can establish relationships with the real world. The relationship between the language, the learning process, and the student must be taken considered. The information we have about the learning process of the language leads us to think that there is no better way to learn it since the students adopt different learning strategies. Recent studies of language learning tend to concentrate specifically on the individual, their wishes and feelings, although sometimes they overlook the difficulties linguistics inherent to the learning of, of a language. The activities that help to learn, no matter how interesting they are, will not be of great help to the English learning unless they present a practice in a systematic way of varied tasks. The new learning units will be assimilated by the student more easily. There is a tendency to use activities simply because they are fun of because their function as activities, without giving importance to their value as learning exercises of the language. It is obvious that what students do in class should be interesting and enjoyable. By that what kind of activities might examine to see of if they are valid when transmitting knowledge to the student. We must find a balance between materials attractive to the student and others that contain important things to learn and that may not be so interesting. Maybe the perfect combination will consist of attractive material that also includes the knowledge that students must acquire. Thank you so much.